What is up, Dynasty Leaguers? Welcome back into another DLF YouTube channel video. Today we're going to be running through, just as I did with my wide receivers, I'm going to do again with my running backs, giving you guys 3 running backs that I am looking to target in Dynasty startup drafts. So if you're doing any of these startups or preparing for any, or maybe you're getting into these DLF Ultra Flex leagues over on Safe Leagues, the new format that you can go check out, the link will be down in the description. But if you're preparing for any of these startup drafts, I'm giving you guys 3 running backs that I'm really looking to target in those drafts. So let's get right into the video. So like I said in the introduction, I'm giving you guys 3 running backs that I'm looking to target in Dynasty startup drafts. I did the same thing with wide receivers in a previous video, so if you missed that one, definitely go check those out. So that's now in total 6 players, 3 wide receivers, and 3 running backs that I'm really looking to target in my Dynasty startups. So we'll begin this video, and the way that I sorted these out was by the most valuable to the least valuable in terms of startup ADP from June DLF ADP through these running backs. So we can start at the very top with the most valuable running back that I have on my list here, and that is Kansas City Chiefs running back Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So he's currently the RB16, going 25th overall in 1 quarterback leagues, 38th overall in Superflex. So right there at that 2-3 turn or the 3-4 turn in Superflex or in 1 quarterback league. So CEH was definitely, one of those guys that when he came into the league in 2020 after being drafted in the 1st round by the Kansas City Chiefs last year, this dude's value went through the roof and skyrocketed. And I definitely do, looking back on it in complete hindsight, definitely do believe that he was overvalued. Of course, we all know that he was overvalued, being taken as a top 5 overall Dynasty running back without even playing a single game or seeing really what he has. It was just primarily based off of that Kansas City Chiefs landing spot. And trust me, I was there. I was with everybody as well because I saw Andy Reid's history with running backs. I knew that Clyde Edwards-Helaire could really bring a whole new element to this offense that we hadn't really seen since Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt did it in his rookie year, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire was one of the best pass-catching, receiving running backs in the class last year. And then you're pairing him with Patrick Mahomes and that offense. Like, how could he not succeed? And so that's what really was driving the whole entire value up for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And then we got 2020, and we saw what he did and what he was able to do. And while it was underwhelming, I think right now when you're looking at his RB16 price tag, I think he's a complete undervalue right now at RB16, and it's actually the cheapest that he has been in over a year. So I do believe that Clyde Edwards-Helaire has a lot of value at his RB16 price tag, especially when you look deeper into what was actually going on in his rookie season last year. In 13 games, he had 181 rush attempts, 803 rushing yards, and 4 rushing touchdowns, and also added 36 receptions, 297 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown on 54 targets, which is a 16-game pace of nearly 1,400 total yards and 6 touchdowns on 267 total touches. And again, that was all in 13 games because he missed 3 games due to being inactive and didn't play in weeks 13, 16, and 17. But from weeks 1 through 12, he was actually an RB1. He was the RB12 overall through those first 12 weeks, and that's including him missing a game because of the Chiefs' bye week. So through 11 games through the first 12 weeks of the season, Clyde Edwards-Helaire was an RB1, and a lot of that was because of just the sheer volume that he was getting. He had 3 games with 20 or more carries, which was tied with Ezekiel Elliott and Cam Akers, and only 1 fewer than Jonathan Taylor, James Robinson, and David Montgomery last year. So he was getting a whole bunch of volume on top of still receiving pretty solid workload in the receiving game. Like I said, 54 targets in 13 games, came down with 36 of them, which was pretty solid. Had a couple games with 8 targets in there, a couple more with 5 or 6. So he was definitely getting volume when he was on the field, even after Le'Veon Bell was signed, which was really, I think, the crucial point of the season in 2020, where a lot of people said, okay, this isn't working out for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. They really made an emphasis to go out and get Le'Veon Bell after he was cut by the New York Jets. But I'm not really going in too much into, why the Chiefs did that. I think obviously they weren't expecting Le'Veon Bell to be there. They're a contending team. This was an NFL move to go out and get Le'Veon Bell and see what he can do to help them get into the Super Bowl and get past and win the Super Bowl. The Buccaneers basically did the same thing with Leonard Fournette, which really kind of killed Ronald Jones. But this is all just moves that NFL teams make because they don't care about fantasy, and they're just making NFL moves to help their team. And I think that's really what the Chiefs did with Le'Veon Bell last year. But if you look at the current Chiefs running back depth chart, it's Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Darrell Williams, Darwin Thompson, Jarrett McKinnon, and Elijah McGuire. So CEH and Darrell Williams are basically the veterans on this team, at least in terms of being on the team with the Chiefs the longest. Darwin Thompson in there as well, but he's mainly a special teams guy. No Damian Williams, he was with the Chicago Bears. Obviously, no Le'Veon Bell, he's still a free agent. So this is CEH, and then Darrell Williams coming in on third down, so just spell CEH. So this is absolutely Clyde Edwards-Helaire's team, and he's going to still get the volume rushing and receiving on this Kansas City Chiefs offense. And let's not forget that, this is a team that is missing some targets from Sammy Watkins, missing some targets from Le'Veon Bell. They're basically, their wide receiver 2 is Mecole Hardman and Demarcus Robinson right now behind Tarik Hill. So you could definitely see CEH getting more volume in the receiving game than what he did last year. Not even to mention the fact that this is his second season in the Chiefs offense, the second season with Andy Reid. So you could definitely see that maybe Andy Reid was hesitant to give CEH a whole bunch of a workload and really throw him out into the wolves in his first rookie season. Maybe try to reel him back a little bit so he didn't really hit a rookie wall and still save him, make sure that he's still got fresh legs. But now this is his second season. Clyde's ready to go. He understands the offense way more. And I think Andy Reid knows that. And I think that we're really going to see Clyde Edwards-Helaire being utilized as more of a 3-down running back, like what we saw Andy Reid use with, Kareem Hunt, Jamal Charles, and Brian Westbrook all the way back with the Philadelphia Eagles. That can be Clyde Edwards-Helaire's ceiling. So I think we should take advantage of this post-hype fatigue associated with Clyde Edwards-Helaire right now, because he is a very, very good running back. He's 22 years old, and an RB16 I think is a value for a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and probably basically the cheapest sophomore running back from this 2020 class of the top 5 or 6 that we know of from that 2020 class. So take advantage of it, and that's why I'm targeting Clyde Edwards-Helaire as one of my main running backs at the top of Dynasty startups at my running back position. The second guy I'm looking to target is Chicago Bears running back David Montgomery. He's the RB22 right now in ADP, going 46th overall in one quarterback leagues, 68th overall in Superflex. And it's super rare, in my opinion, to see a 24-year-old running back who's coming off a top 5 fantasy season being valued at RB22 outside the top 20 in ADP, which I think is kind of crazy. And I know that there's a lot that really goes with David Montgomery and with his season last year. We're going to get into all of that, but he was a top 5 running back last year in fantasy and still was pretty solid even in his rookie year in 2019. His stats last year, he had 247 rush attempts, 1,070 yards, and 8 touchdowns, and then also added an additional 68 targets, 54 receptions, 438 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So it was a lot better than what we saw from David Montgomery from his rookie season. He had basically the same amount of rushing volume, but he was a lot better on the ground and a lot more efficient in terms of yards per carry. Scored a bit more, and then also obviously saw basically double the amount of production in the receiving game. And yes, I know a lot of that probably stems from the fact that Tarik Cohen missed like the entire season in 2020 because of his injury and him being on the injured reserve. So a lot of that comes from Tarik Cohen, the Bears receiving specialist, not being on the field. And you can even see that reflected in his splits with and without Tarik Cohen over the past 2 years. David Montgomery has averaged only 11 fantasy points per game with Tarik Cohen, 15 rush attempts, 56 yards, and then only 2 targets per game with Tarik Cohen. But you can see that huge jump in games without Tarik Cohen. Last year in 12 games, he averaged 19 fantasy points per game, 17 rush attempts, 73 rushing yards, almost 5 targets per game, 4 receptions, 31 receiving yards. So you can see absolutely that receiving workload is very much because Tarik Cohen was not on the field. You also can look at his, game log and stuff like that last year because he had that monstrous end to the season in 2020. And yeah, a lot of that came against weak defenses and still no Tarik Cohen. But from weeks 12 through 17, David Montgomery was the RB2 in fantasy and only 0.2 of a point behind Derrick Henry, who was the RB1. But he was also the third highest scoring fantasy player overall among all positions behind Derrick Henry and Josh Allen. So he had just a beast mode of a final 6-game stretch for fantasy football, and especially those last 5 weeks that, carried teams through the fantasy playoffs to victory, to championships. David Montgomery won people championships last year. And so I know that there's a lot of that going on with David Montgomery, and I've said it as well, with Tarik Cohen back, where does David Montgomery's volume really come from? Does he come back down to earth? Does he not get the receiving workload? What does David Montgomery's workload look like with Tarik Cohen back in this Bears offense? But I also think that there's a lot of positives for David Montgomery heading into 2021. You can also look, and around that time when the Bears really started picking up steam last year and David Montgomery was really, really good from week 12 on, Matt Nagy also relinquished play calling duties to offensive coordinator Bill Lazor during their bye week in week 11. So you can see that, Bill Lazor taking over that offense also contributed to David Montgomery and that entire Bears offense just being a whole lot better. Not to mention that their offensive line was much more stable and they were a lot more comfortable then as well. Montgomery is also heading into his third NFL season on an offense that I believe will get a lot better because they drafted Justin Fields as such a value in the 2021 quarterback class. I think Justin Fields can immediately come in and be a fantastic quarterback. And even if it is Andy Dalton can basically be Mitch Trubisky's skill, right? Like, I think that they're basically the same quarterback. So that floor, you have still the same offense as what they had last year, still Bill Lazor calling the plays, and then with the potential upside of what Justin Fields can bring. And again, at worst, David Montgomery can still be an RB2 in that same offense like he was in 2019. He was the RB24 overall in his rookie year in 2019, just from straight rushing volume, not even including any of the receiving workload, which is basically equivalent to his RB22 price right now in Dynasty. So you're getting him at basically his floor, in my opinion, with a whole lot of upside still. And also not to mention the fact that he's basically the last stable workhorse running back going at RB22, because after him then comes Chris Carson, who is also a really good workhorse, but has injuries, just signed a new contract, but is a little bit older as well than David Montgomery. Then after him, Kareem Hunt, Myles Gaskin, Trey Sermon, Mike Davis, Chase Edmonds, Michael Carter, James Robinson, Ronald Jones. Like, these are all backups or, guys in the back end of a committee, or other guys that we're just potentially hopeful on in Trey Sermon and Michael Carter. That, he's basically the last stable workhorse running back who has at least 2 more years in his rookie deal, or at least some sort of semblance of stability in his offense and contract that we can really be safe and okay with. And so that RB22 price is your RB2 or maybe even your RB3, depending on how you build out your rosters. I love taking the shot and targeting David Montgomery in my Dynasty startups right now. The final guy I want to mention is going to be, just like in my wide receivers, I did a couple high price guys and then I really dropped it down to talk about a much lower valued player right now. That is Tennessee Titans running back Darrynton Evans, the RB59 overall. He's going 189th overall in one quarterback leagues, 216th overall in Superflex. So this is like a late round dart throw that you really can just put on the back of your bench and just kind of see what happens. If you don't remember who Darrynton Evans is, or know who he is, I don't blame you, because he didn't really do anything last year. He only played in 67 total snaps in 5 games last year with the Tennessee Titans due to being on injured reserve with a hamstring injury and whatnot throughout the majority of the year. But he was the Tennessee Titans' 3rd round pick in 2020 in last year's draft, and he was a beast in college at Appalachian State, had almost 1,700 total yards and 23 total touchdowns in his final season at App State. He's 5'10", 205 pounds, runs a 4.41 40-yard dash, and he comes very well to other guys like Nyheim Hines, Austin Eckler, and Jerick McKinnon, who they're not, the best names, and we're not really going after these guys for fantasy. Austin Eckler, sure, but Hines and McKinnon, so that they're not really the greatest and the best, but Darrynton Evans could be, and he could play in this Titans offense, that specialty sat back role with Tennessee, like a James White, like a Giovanni Bernard, like a Nyheim Hines, like Jerick McKinnon did for a little bit with Minnesota and San Francisco. But then also, in my opinion, has the best resume to be a workhorse on the Tennessee Titans, just in case, knock on wood, just in case Derrick Henry goes down. I think that Darrynton Evans could be that next man up, because on that depth chart, it's basically like Jeremy McNichols and some other guys that I don't even know. So I think Darrynton Evans has the most upside from that depth chart, and I think a guy that the Tennessee Titans really, really like because they drafted him in the 3rd round in just last year's draft. And he also has some camp hype as well coming out of Titans minicamp right now, especially from Mike Vrabel recently. Vrabel said that they're very excited about him, that they're trying to cross-train him, give him multiple roles in this offense. And that is true. He has been working out with both the running backs and the wide receivers at camp, even after the addition of Julio Jones. So they're trying to see where Darrynton Evans can fit in this offense, because, you know, even though they added Julio Jones and they lost Corey Davis, they lost Adam Humphries, they lost Johnny Smith, there's not a whole lot going on in terms of weaponry. And I think Darrynton Evans, and I think the Titans know that Darrynton Evans is a very explosive and capable player with the ball in his hands, and can be more than just a special teams kind of a player, and can really carve out a role in this Titans offense, whether that be as a 3rd down satellite back, because we know that Derrick Henry's not getting receptions, and we know that they're just not going to throw to him. So it could be in that 3rd down role. It could be lined up as a wide receiver in the slot, where he can just kind of come out on some certain plays in packages, maybe get 4 or 5 targets per game, maybe gets an additional 4 or 5 rush attempts per game. I'm not really expecting a huge amount of volume when Derrick Henry's on the field, but he could potentially be this extra gadgety type of player who gets some crafty volume during some weeks, and could potentially, like I said, be the next guy up if Derrick Henry goes down. So that's really why I like to invest in Darrynton Evans at that RB59 price tag, because when you get to that point, like I said, 189th overall in one quarterbacks, 216th in Superflex, like, what do you have to lose? Just take a shot on a guy and a running back who I think could see some volume and some gadgetry type plays, or some sort of a role in that offense with the Tennessee Titans already, just as potentially a satellite back, like I said, like James White or Giovanni Bernard or Nyheim Hines. He could be just that straight up, which is still valuable, better than RB59 for sure, but I also think has some more upside if Derrick Henry were to go down. So that's why I really like targeting Darrynton Evans as one of those late round type of guys that you can just stash on the back of your roster and just kind of see what happens. And worst case scenario, maybe he absolutely isn't anything at all, and you can just drop him for a priority waiver wire ad or something like that. But just see what happens as we go through the rest of the summer into a little bit of the season, because I feel like we could see some Darrynton Evans popping up throughout the rest of the summer, entering training camp, entering preseason, and entering the 2021 NFL season. So that's it. That's going to be my 3 running backs that I really like to be targeting in Dynasty startups right now. So if you're preparing for any of those startups, or like I said at the beginning, we at DLF just partnered with Safe Leagues to create the DLF Ultra Flex Leagues, where you have 10 starters in your starting lineup. All of them are flex positions, including 2 of them being super flex. So you can really build out your roster any way that you like and any way that you see fit. So those startups are going on right now. You can go to safeleagues.com or click on the link that I have down in the description below and go and join one of those leagues and prepare for those startup drafts and target these 3 running backs, or like I said, 3 wide receivers that I did in a previous video to really help you guys out in your startup drafts. So with that all being said, guys, thank you all so much for watching. We'll catch y'all later.